Good evening. The reason behind evidence-based management and decision-making is this. There's concern that too many people are more interested in copying one another, doing what has always been done, which is doing what is traditional, and making decisions based on beliefs about what ought to be done rather than what actually works. I guess that would be pragmatism, empiricism, evidence-based management principles. So the concern is that people fail to face the hard facts and use the best evidence to help navigate the competitive environment. So just a quick review. I would like to help the viewer recollect precisely what evidence-based management is, right? If you recall from the progression of management theory, we first started with the classical viewpoint, basically very systems-based and reduced the individuals who were working within the system into just cogs. And then there was a little bit of a movement away from that in behavioral viewpoint, in the sense that people became more important and individuals became more important. And then came the quantitative viewpoint, and evidence-based management is part of the quantitative uh, viewpoint of management. And of course, we have other viewpoints which are basically seesawing back and forth between systemic views and individual views, right? So, I guess what I wanted to add is that evidence-based management or the quantitative approach to management is more of a scientific, empirical, Baconian approach to finding truths. And what do we mean by that? Well, you find truths or God's laws or nature's laws by looking at patterns in the data and through observation. This is an empiricism or this is the scientific approach. And the evidence of the environment around you points you towards nature's laws or God's laws. I would like to add that this is obviously inferior to management by epiphany or revelation. Okay, so just a review of evidence-based management techniques and concepts. So evidence-based management entails translating principles based on the best evidence into organizational practice, bringing rationality to the decision-making process. Again, as we discussed earlier, rationality is based on known morality or known ideas of what is right and wrong. Learning to make managerial decisions based on evidence is the approach we hope you will learn to take after studying many other approaches. And basically, it involves looking at the hard facts and what works and what doesn't, understanding that you have to avoid half-truths, just conventional wisdom should be avoided, and rejecting total nonsense, etc. At least what evidence-based managers view as total nonsense, right? Okay, so now on to some implementation guidelines for evidence-based management. Um, uh, Essentially, what is recommended is that you should treat your organization as an unfinished prototype. That is, you should be ready to change direction and provide offerings to your customer that keep your company viable. The second recommendation is just focus on the facts and the data in order to better exploit your resources and improve your offerings. The third one is that try to see your organizations uh, and your the people within it and yourself as from an impartial or different perspectives, really, whether it's outsiders or friendly or hostile. Then we come to the point of evidence-based management being not just for senior executives. The recommendation goes like this: you should try to share the data with everybody so that everybody can have an input. Like everything else, even with evidence-based management, they recommend that you try to sell it because most people feel correctly that data is perhaps a little too dry and boring, and stories are far more compelling. The next recommendation or the next implementation principle is if all else fails, try to circumvent poorly informed injunctions. This is something I do not recommend because it seems to be unethical. And lastly, the best diagnostic question for your organization or in implementing this might be what what failed and why it failed and what happens when people fail, and using that failure to learn, right? So this pattern of this particular approach of finding patterns in data lends ideally to the role of using large amounts of data, right? In the and using algorithms and AI in decision making, or aiding in decision making, in the detective work, which is required to elicit patterns out of large amounts of data, right? So I'll go briefly over a little bit more detail into a little bit more detail on each one of these principles. First of all, treat your organization as an unfinished product. Be ready to pivot and change, be scrappy, things like that. An example that is given is that Danish Oil and Natural Gas renamed the company Ørsted and went from oil and gas to wind power, right? Offshore wind power, and basically that formed 60% of their profits and allowed them to become the leading wind power provider. And today it's the largest offshore wind company with 30% of market share, right? Then the next principle is no brags, just facts, which is like use the facts and data to maximize efficiency and profits. So this is already done by, you would say, some casinos. An example given is MGM Resorts. They basically use their slot machine data to figure out which machines are popular and which locations are popular, and then they try to maximize location machine popularity, right? And they try to combine the two. So this is basically used also by some of the other casinos like Caesars Entertainment, which tries to study consumer preferences. Okay, next, try to invite cognitive dissonance and truthful feedback. That should be pretty obvious, I suppose, as try to see yourself as outsiders do and avoid consonants and, falling into cognitive bubbles where you are disconnected from reality or not so well connected from reality, right? Okay. The next point is try to involve as many people as possible in the quantitative and qualitative data so that the decision-making process is able to garner different perspectives again, right? The next principle is, like everything else, try to sell it, like try to use vivid stories and metaphors and use your storytelling ability to sell the insights from the data. Okay, next recommendation or principle for implementing evidence-based decision-making techniques is try to learn from failure, right? Because failure is useful and, no, wait. That would be the next point, right? That would be the next slide. I apologize. Yeah, in this case, try to ignore or delay implementation of unfounded orders. Yeah, I think I skipped it because I find this to be rather unethical. Basically, some people recommend, just delaying or ignoring orders that are that you find to be ineffective, right? I do not recommend that. So I'd rather go to the next point, which is like try to study, diagnose the problems by studying what happens when people fail, and remember that, failure is a great um, a way to learn, I suppose. Not the best. I would try to learn through success, but try to take a more optimistic view of failure. I suppose that's one of the principles or recommendations. Now, there are some hurdles. Some of them are listed here. For example, there might be too much evidence, like you might be overwhelmed with it and not be able to garner details and insights from the evidence. And the evidence might not be good enough. The quality might not be good enough. The evidence might not be a great fit, might not even be relevant. And some people might use it to mislead you, right? And it might also mean that you are also misleading yourself sometimes. That can happen too. Then there's the point of being you basically look at evidence and climb out of a situation into a worse situation, out of the frying pan into the fire. This is basically where the side effects outweigh the cure. This can happen, by the way, and this is a hurdle to evidence-based management. Again, these are all the drawbacks of just using conventional, traditional morality, as opposed to like more up-to-date and real-time morality, right? Okay, and the last point I'd like to make is that stories are more persuasive than data, and this is something that we've already gone over. Okay, then the conclusion is that I'm not really a fan of evidence-based management, but data and evidence does have its uses and its places. So do use it and try to use that as a supportive player, I suppose, in a supporting role, and hopefully avoid using the data to reinforce your biases. And that should be it. Thank you for viewing this.